Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we just heard from Mike Ratzios and the government applications of promote, protect for artificial intelligence and AI. And this session is about the actual capitalist application of this revolutionary technology in our world. And we have a wonderful panel, so I don't need to do much of the talking. I'll just do a lot of the asking. So I'll introduce just all the way down here on my left, Dmitry Shevelenko of Perplexity. Perplexity, one of the hottest AI startups on the planet right now. Next to him, Sean Pack, who is probably one of the most foremost legal minds when it comes to IP protection at Quinn Emanuel. Dave Levy at AWS previously, to Apple, and I think you've been leading the government interface for adoption for a long time at these big companies. And somebody next to me that really needs no introduction, one of the top 100 AI minds in the Time 100 list in 2023, Google DeepMind's Lila Ibrahim, COO. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are living through probably one of the greatest technological shifts of our lifetimes. But in terms of protecting and promote and using this technology safely, and just the government interactions around artificial intelligence and AI, I think we have to talk about guardrails, first of all. So Lila, why don't I start with you? Because Google DeepMind, of course, probably one of the most advanced AI companies on the planet. But when governments come to you and say, how do we make sure that this technology is safe? What do you say?
Thanks for having me here, and it's a really great question. I think what's been really interesting is the past few years, just to see the journey that different governments have been on. DeepMind was founded in 2010, and our goal is really to build AI responsibly to benefit humanity. So responsibility has always been built in from the beginning. It really starts from the private sector. So one of the conversations with governments is actually engage the model builders in the conversation of what does responsibility and safety mean, and that's really where the guardrails are, because it has to be built in from the start, doing it as a bolt-on. With the pace in which the technology is being developed and deployed, you can't do that here, because as soon as you launch a model, it's available to billions of people worldwide. So one is really on the accountability within the organizations, and that's everything from the research to the governance processes to thinking about how the partnerships that need to happen with the deployment. And that's we can talk about examples there. The other thing that I think is really important from a government perspective, obviously they're experts in their space, and we can bring the knowledge around AI. So a lot of this is information sharing to help understand not where the technology is, but where it's going. Because, again, the pace is moving so quickly, it's hard to be in the moment. And instead, we need to plan for where the technology is going. And I think it's really spot on in that this is going to require governments around the world working together, because there are no borders here. So a lot of this cross collaboration is increasingly critical. But the key point is this is absolutely a transformational technology. And transformational technology requires exceptional care, and you have to operationalize it. And I can tell you, having been working on this for so long, it's probably one of the most important parts of my job. It's also not the sexiest, right? Like, you have to really be in this every single day. So this isn't a one and done type conversation.
So what's sexy then in AI? I'm just curious. What is, if it's not interfacing with governments to make sure this is properly regulated?
Well, I think a lot of people want to talk about the emerging capabilities and the technology development, but really, one of the things that we need to do is you have to be able to look ahead and say, where are the capabilities going? And then how do we actually do the research? So as we were talking about agents last year and demonstrating that capability, we had actually started research on what are the ethics around assistance. What does this mean for a human and the technology, the AI systems, to be working together to take action, and still maintaining control? Like, how do we make sure it's not being misused, and that it's aligned with human values and whose values? So a lot of these things, there aren't clear answers. And so it's a lot of creating the culture for that.
Well, that's a great question for the entire industry at large as well. So I'm going to move it down to Dmitry, since we just brought up the discussion about agents, Perplexity, of course. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, given that there are a few lawsuits right now that involve Perplexity. How do you make sure that all the stakeholders feel that their information, the rules are protected and employed?
So, so I think one of the most important concepts as we think about safety and applied AI, which is what Perplexity is. So we power an answer machine. When you come, you ask questions, and then you get answers. But when you get those answers, it's not just a black box. We actually show you the sources where that information came from. And that was the defining differentiation of Perplexity from day one. And a lot of the industry has followed us, which is great because trust is going to be the key challenge for AI. How do we get users to trust our products? How do we get governments to trust the products? And the bedrock of trust is not saying, trust me, it's transparency. And that transparency starts from where's the information coming from. It continues. We publish every week a change log of every single change we made to the Perplexity product, no matter how big, no matter how small. And we want users to expect that, and we want the industry to operate that way. We actually saw a really unfortunate backslide with our friends at ChatGPT the other week, where they pushed out an update that made ChatGPT the world's greatest sycophant. Even if you were to say, hey, I want to go start a cult and get 100 people to join me, it would be like, great, good job showing that initiative. And it was a result of post-training towards a certain type of feedback. And we need to be very mindful of these small changes and how they express themselves in the product.
But Dimitri, what about stakeholders like the New York Times when they want their copyright to be rewarded and they're saying that companies, agents like Perplexity are not paying them their fair share for their IP?
So we have an incredible tradition of fair use that really you can't have open societies without, right? If somebody expresses a fact, it can't be, and that's a public fact, that fact can't be monopolized because you can't exchange ideas, you can't have information. We absolutely value the incredible work of journalists and publishers. That's why we have a publisher program where we actually share revenue back with publishers when we use it to answer questions. And we think those sorts of alignment incentive challenges are going to be really important to solve. But it is also true that we would not have the AI we do today if we didn't have fair use, and fair use has been the bedrock of a lot of internet progress and growth.
Well, that's a great transition to bring in Sean then to talk about fair use, copyright. Sean, you were the lead, I think, the lead lawyer in the Sonos versus Google case. So when you look at AI and protecting IP and copyright, how complex is it? Perplexity versus NY Times is a great example.
So, we heard a lot about transparency and ethics, and I think we also heard from David and Michael about the need for promotion as well as protection. Right now, I'm reminded of Jeffrey Moore's book on crossing the chasm, and that's where we are in terms of litigation risk, regulatory environment. We have different countries taking very different approaches, how they balance the needs of public safety, to copyright ownership, to innovation. And the problem right now is really there's outside of this room and outside the great minds of the people working in the companies, there's an incredible amount of skepticism in the public world about what AI is and what AI will do in the future. And that's being evidenced when you see commentary from judges in hearings to eventually a lot of these cases will be decided by jurors who are average lay people that do not have legal backgrounds and technical backgrounds. So I think the big message for me when I communicate to my clients is the need for the tech community to engage with the public to, first of all, simplify the explanation along the lines of transparency. What is machine learning? Why is it transformative? What are we doing with the data that is different than just replicating the input copyrighted works? Why do we need so many billions of data points to allow the machine to see these aggregate patterns and make its own predictions and make its own creative outputs? I think that's important. And I think on fair use, it's equally important. You look at the Google Books case. You look at a lot of cases, Oracle case against Google, where public benefits of the technology was the foundation through which the Supreme Court and other courts have said there is fair use. So we as an industry have to do a better job of communicating the public benefits and explaining in simple, clear language what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're not doing.
But what is fair compensation then for input use and copyright protection?
So I think it really comes down to whether there's copyright infringement at all. And so one thing that people should understand in the US law is that fair use means that there's no copyright infringement. So these issues are now being litigated as to where is that line. For example, if I could train a machine learning model to replicate exactly what the input copyrighted works were, that is not the goal and objective of 99% of the companies in the world. They're using lots of data in order for the machine to aggregate that data and use coefficients and other training tools to be able to see patterns across lots of individual works in a collective manner. So that's a fundamentally transformative act,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the line is going to be decided. And I think one thing that's important when we heard David and Michael talk about this is regulation, deregulation doesn't mean that you have delitigation, right? Deregulation actually in the United States has led to a lot of litigation. So simply because the government is not acting to enforce regulation doesn't mean we'll have less litigation. It's actually the opposite. So I think there may be a need for some type of coordinated effort among governments to come up with safe harbors that are ethical, responsible, that recognizes the needs of the copyright owners.
So more litigation is what you foresee in the future,
Yes,
right?
that's how
Okay.
the United States court systems work. If you don't have regulatory regime, then we have a tort-based system, we have an intellectual property-based system that allows plaintiffs and owners to bring their own claims, and that's how litigation will regulate.
Right,
And we really don't want
and you're
that.
seeing a lot of antitrust cases that are being litigated right now on past actions
That's
as
right.
well. So, Dave, let me ask you about government interaction, because do you foresee, and I think Mike brought this up earlier, protect and promote, but are governments now, especially in this tariff battle that we're in, or this trade war, is every country now putting up their own guardrails?
There's a lot of regulatory ideas out there, and there are a lot of regulatory schemes. But I don't see, by and large, governments putting up their own guardrails. What I see them trying to do, rightly so, is figure out what is responsible AI for them in the context of their system, in the context of what they want to accomplish, and in the context of what makes sense for their constituents. And so I think that's a healthy discussion. The discussion's going on here in the US as well too. And I think that's a balanced discussion. I would say though it is a balancing act because if you think about, and Mike mentioned this in President Trump's memo, executive order in January, he rightly called out that our entrepreneurial spirit here in the US, our free markets, our incredible body of research institutions here in the US present this massive opportunity for the United States and really for the rest of the world. And so you want to strike this balance between regulation and innovation. There are going to be, at Amazon, we say that this generative AI, AGI, they're going to reinvent every customer experience we know. And it's happening right now, and it's happening really fast, and it's happening at governments. And they're doing it in transparent ways. They're doing it with explainability engines, with great partners. And so this is happening right now in governments, and I think they're trying to figure out along the way to do it, but they don't want to stand in the way. I think we've got a balance between standing in the way of.
Well, we know that revolutionary technology moves across borders, but when every region has their own rules, for instance, the European Union came up with their own AI rules, and there's a protection, of course, for IP, but also possible fines of 7% of global revenue if there are any violations. So how does the U.S., I guess, try to promote, but yet, again, promote their own technology, but protect when other governments are doing different things around the world?
Yeah. So for companies like ours at Amazon and AWS, one of the things that's really critical is working backwards from the customer. And so I think these times present a tremendous opportunity because it's not it's not just the governments themselves, but it's the users of this that are demanding transparency, demanding trust and safety. And so what you have is companies that will build that into their products. You know, we have coding assistants and code generation types of products, and customers want features built in that make AI responsible for them, and companies like ours will build that in. And so some of these things will happen because of the innovation, even irrespective of the regulation.
Interesting. Okay. And this is a great time for me to remind the audience. Thank you for joining us so early this morning here in Los Angeles. But I also want to note that this is an interactive session. So if you have questions for our panelists, I do have an iPad here. I am full of technology today. And this will list your questions. If you take the QR code and then file in your questions, and I will be happy to ask our panelists this towards the end of this conversation. But just to get back to DeepMind and Lila, I just want to ask about ethics, since there is a case in the UK where 300 of your UK employees are threatening to unionize because they are concerned about ethics and use when it comes to AI in defense and weaponry. What do you say to that when people are asking, is there an ethical use right now? And could there be a threat to ethical use of AI?
Yeah. Well, first, maybe I can just give a little bit of context. So, as I mentioned, DeepMind was founded in 2010, and the responsibility and ethics were really part of the founding of the organization, including when it was acquired by Google in 2014. Around 2018, we came up with our AI principles, which included some red lines. A lot has changed. I mean, I've also been, it's around the time that I started. A lot has changed in those years. There was a time when I was working in this company and in this role when no one had any clue what I was doing.
Right.
So things have changed. But it was time to update our AI principles. And what did not change with the updates is the fact that we still have the same values, we still have the same mission, the same governance process, the same research and focus on ethics. But I think with that change, of course, every employee responds to these changes in a different way. So we have been engaging in conversation to try to explain what is happening. And a lot of the work is really about wanting to engage and collaborate with governments in a
Can I just quickly
way.
explain what the changes are, just so our audience knows? Because I believe Google DeepMind recently dropped the clause where you didn't want your technology to be used to cause or likely to cause harm in weaponry and surveillance.
Yeah, and it's just to be clear, it's not a DeepMind change; it's a Google-wide change, and it's now really focused on, do the benefits significantly outweigh the harms? So it's not that we removed a red line, but it was replaced still with the essence of what it was meant. And again, so much has changed in the past 7 years, and this recognition of the pace in which the technology is moving, we have to be able to work with governments, democratic governments, on the pace of this. So on the pace of the change, and want to be able to have the conversation of what is the role that AI has in national security, cybersecurity, biosecurity, et cetera. These are important topics as the technology gets increasingly capable. So we feel like it's actually more responsible to engage in the conversations. However, employees there's a wide range of opinions, so we've been engaging in conversations. In the UK, this is one of the actions the employees are exploring, and in order to bring their voice to light.
Absolutely.
So, from our perspective, though, and I think this is really important, is the fact that we believe to be responsible leaders. We strongly believe in the democratic values that the AI companies need to be leading with. We have to be engaging in conversations, participating in events like this, having conversations with a wide range of government stakeholders, because we believe we have something to contribute into that, and we also have a lot to learn on what the range of issues are, and how do we ensure that, as we aspire to build this technology, we're doing so in a responsible way. I mean, I tell people this. I spent 50 hours interviewing for this job, and I did so because I thought, wow, this could really Could AI help us unlock our understanding of the world and solve some of the biggest challenges that society is facing, whether it's sustainability, whether it's understanding diseases? Like, what kind of legacy can I leave my daughters if I can leave the world a better place? But what happens if something goes wrong with this technology? In those 50 hours, we're very much trying to diligence the organization and the technology, because I may have 3 decades in technology, but not in AI exactly. So from my perspective, I feel like we've been working so hard at this. Now would be, just because the principles change doesn't mean that our values change. It just means where and how we show up and into what conversations. We think it's more critical than ever to be there.
Yeah, and just Dave, in parts of, I guess, in relation to that ethical line, the $1.2 billion Israeli defense project, which Amazon is also part of the, I guess, the technology provider in that. How do you, I guess, communicate to your company and I guess to global governments about ethics and red lines then for what AWS does in AI?
Sure. Well, I think in every place we operate around the world, and Amazon and AWS operate globally. First of all, we're just very focused on making sure that we have the ability to operate within the laws of that land, and so we have an acceptable use policy that our customers understand deeply, and we spend time with them on that, and that's for all of our products and services, AI, cloud, everything that we do. And so we have a very deep partnership with our customers, and we understand that they need to deploy technologies to solve problems. And our goal really is to help them do that at scale, to democratize the use of these technologies, make it easy for them to use, make it cost effective for them to use. And they partner with us very closely. And if they have questions about the use of certain technologies, we certainly talk to them about that and have a conversation about that. But our goal is really to help them solve the problems that they're looking to solve and do that with our technology. And sometimes that means innovating with them. Sometimes that means helping them build the guardrails they need to build in the technology to make sure it's acceptable in their environment.
And just Sean, from the legal perspective, ethics, red lines, I mean, how do you, I guess, what are the parameters from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember how quickly this industry is changing and will change. So guardrails as a concept that may have been effective in the last 5, 10 years is not going to work necessarily into the future. So I think whether you're looking at it from a legal perspective or you look at it from a policy perspective, I think it's really the process that's most important. How do you create a process through which these things are evaluated internally? How are they communicated externally with not only government actors, but again, from my perspective, the public at large? So David talked about this. Ultimately AI is going to succeed and will be adopted because people want it. And the only way they're going to understand AI as a beneficial tool is for them to understand that AI models are going to solve the greatest healthcare problems that we have, is going to create opportunities for private, individualized learning of our children all around the world. Those kinds of benefits need to be explained because at the end of the day, it's going to be a balancing of those public interests versus potential harm. And I think the process through which the industry engages with the government, but also the public at large, is what's really important because I don't think there's a black letter law answer to any of these questions. I don't think there's any ethical answer today that's going to solve all the problems for us because AI will be adopted across all the different regimes and different use cases. So I think it's really about process engineering of how do we engage the right set of advisors, messaging, and transparency.
Yeah, fast-changing industry and technology that it is. But just a different twist, I guess, on the ethics question for you, Dimitri. Since we do live in this age of misinformation, disinformation, the New York Times this morning said that hallucinations are actually getting worse for a lot of these AI models. So I think they did a study where DeepSeek hallucinated 14% of the time, OpenAI and Google was at 1 to 2%, and Anthropic was at 4%. But in this era of misinformation, how do you make sure that that percentage is coming down instead of going up, which seems to be the trend?
Yeah, well, this goes back to the transparency point. Um, there is no capital T truth in the world, and so hallucinations are somewhat relative. That's again why at Perplexity we've always grounded answers in real-time sources, and we use AI not as a source of knowledge, but as the world's best summarizer, synthesizer, and reasoner against that knowledge. And it's on users, as it's always been, to decide whether the sources used to answer their question are trustworthy or not. Um, I think in terms of the technical reasons hallucinations are becoming more prominent is the models now are taking on more complex tasks. They're thinking, in computer speak, thinking for longer windows of time. And so that introduces more opportunities for an error that then compounds. And so there's good technical reasons the hallucination rate might increase. But I'd also like to come back to the ethics point and broadly around AI safety. And I say this without any caveat. The greatest AI safety risk is that the US is not leading in frontier AI model development and application. One of the reasons actually DeepSeek R1, and there's a lot of informed speculation on this.
I was going to bring that up, but go ahead.
Why it did so well is it actually trained on all copyrighted English language works.
Distillation.
Well, no. So it distilled other models, but the initial training run had zero, because they were like, we're not going to get sued by the New York Times. We're just going to, we're going to take all this data and we don't care, right? And so that's why, ironically, a Chinese model writes better English than American developed models is because there was much more limited copyright constraints or none at all. And again, this isn't proven, but this is kind of the consensus inside AI company view on why R1 did so well. And so we need to bring that global competitiveness perspective here, right? As we develop these ethical policies, we can't constrain ourselves to the point where we lose to China and other adversary countries.
Yeah, so I was going to naturally transition to Lila on that as well, in terms of DeepSeek and how that shocked the world. The US needs to lead in this technology, but do you feel that China is either just, I would probably say neck to neck maybe, or just slightly behind?
The way that we look at it is very much kind of competing with ourselves on a lot of this. And I think, if you ask me, I think the U.S. has some tremendous leadership in this space because all of the models that are being developed and built here in the U.S. and by U.S. organizations have a long history of doing, what I want to be competing on is are we operationalizing care, are we readying society, and are we doing innovative work to showcase the benefits of where AI can help? And I think we have strong leadership, and I say we, like collectively, we have strong leadership in that space.
So do you believe that China is still behind the US then when it comes to this type of technology?
Yeah, I do, because I think a lot of the innovation too that still, I think it was mentioned earlier as well, there's still a lot of, we're in the very early days of AI still. There's a lot of innovation that needs to happen at the model level. There's innovation that needs to happen, I think mentioned in the frontier safety. We're also talking a lot about generative AI from a text perspective, but there's still so much other opportunities when you think about AI. I like to give the example of, if we limit ourselves to a small box, we limit the potential that AI could really bring to benefit. So one of the areas that, for example, that we've really been focused on, and maybe the biggest benefit of AI to date, according to the Nobel Prize, which we were awarded last year, was for the work in AI for science.
Yes.
And I think when you look again at the application of AI into new areas, I think the US is leading, and it's not just what's happening within the private sector, but in universities as well and in collaboration.
Yeah, and how do you see the AI race, Dave, since you interact with governments all around the world?
Yeah, Lila's absolutely right. Like we're at the very beginning. I mean, we're in the early milliseconds of this, if you can imagine that. Like so. This is the start. I think we have fantastic leadership in the U.S. and we've got fantastic business leadership, fantastic tech leadership, and on the foundation, on the model side, will there be times, I think, where somebody will figure out how to get interconnect speeds a little bit better and tune something and do something that that's going to happen. But I think in the fullness of time, the amount of energy, the amount of capital, the amount of intellectual capital that we're putting behind developing these technologies is really meaningful and
Well, you know, the
significant.
administration says the U.S. has to lead. So if you had to put a global ranking together, I'm sorry to press you on this, but what would be the top 1, 2, 3?
Well, I'll only talk about the top. I think the U.S. is I think the
Yeah.
U.S. is leading on this. We certainly need to extend that lead and continue to extend that lead, and I think that's happening. And then I think I think the rest of the world is coming along on that journey, and we'll need partners to do that.
Right. And Sean, just from, I guess, the policy perspective, in order for the U.S. to lead, do they need to protect and keep all the technology to themselves? And I'm notably talking about the diffusion rule when it comes to these high-grade AI chips.
Yeah, so I think AI protection, we talked a lot about the copyright aspects, but even if you look at patent protection today for AI innovations, we have a number of challenges in our United States courts and our statutes. So for example, in order to qualify for a US patent, it cannot be done by a machine. The invention has to be done by a human being. So you get to a point where you have very, very deep models that have been trained, and then now the model itself is creating new innovations and new inventions. Under US patent law, that's not patentable. So we have an issue with that. We also have, in the United States court system, a concept called subject matter eligibility, which is certain abstract ideas cannot be patented. And so anyone who's facing a patent infringement lawsuit in the US can challenge the patent, especially an AI patent, by saying it's too abstract. These are just mathematical ideas, and all you're reciting are generic computing components for either encapsulating mathematical ideas or abstract manipulations of data. So these are legal challenges that we're facing. So I think part of this goes back to what Dimitri said. We have incredible technological leadership. We have incredible leadership in terms of focusing on ethics and minimizing product liability issues, where I think we're behind certain countries. For example, Japan enacted a safe harbor provision for data training in Japan using copyrighted works. I think where we're behind is that we have too much uncertainty and too much chaos in terms of how these issues are being dealt with in the courts, as well as from a lack of regulation standpoint. We don't really have a comprehensive plan right now, or at least on the books, how to deal with these issues. So that's going to be a headwind drag. I think from an investor standpoint, we have to look at this and say there's systematic risk if EU is going to be dominating the regulation environment. US doesn't really have a national initiative in place to deal with that. Where are the investment dollars going to go in terms of where you want to put your dollars into technology companies that are leading the charge for AI stack dominance? A lot of smart money is going to go to places like China and Japan and elsewhere. So I think that's a big systematic risk for US-based industries, is that if we don't get a handle around this, that in 4 or 5 years, because of the litigation risk and uncertainty around regulation in the US, that there will be less investment in US-based companies.
Yeah. So I guess, when it comes to promoting the technology, but then making sure that you protect it as well. I'm just wondering, Dimitri, from your perspective and perplexity, when you hear from the chip makers themselves, like NVIDIA, and they say that the diffusion rule really helps China and other countries, the U.S. should be the source of these high-tech chips so that the rest of the world will depend on our technology. How do you see this diffusion rule?
I think this one's a little bit above my pay grade. I mean, it's a fair argument. We're proud to have NVIDIA as an investor in Perplexity, and they've done an incredible job to cultivate this ecosystem. I think, to me, the focus is less about trying to constrain China, because in some ways, they were constrained and then they innovated on their own hardware, and that might, create, second-order adverse effects. And it's really about accelerating the U.S., right? The answer to most competitor questions I get that I give is we just have to go faster. Speed is the moat, and that needs to be the policy on a government level as well. How do we just move faster? We have to assume that China will build its own hardware. They will be able to catch up. We just have to keep going faster, use our inherent freedom. That's the structural advantage we have, is we're a free society. We can exchange information faster and spin the wheel faster.
So, as I mentioned, I am taking questions from the audience, and there are numerous questions that have come in and comments as well. So, I'm going to use the last 20 minutes of this panel, and I'll just rifle through the number of, I see tens of questions on here and curiosity about this technology, obviously. So I'll just file it and rifle at certain members of the panel. So why don't I start here? Question of Lila. When you mention we need to make sure these agents are aligned with our values, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and there is a paper that we've published. In fact, before we even showcased agentic technology, we did the paper hand in hand, and we have a team of social scientists who have been saying, how do you make sure the machines don't run ahead, right? Of like that they stay within the control and that they have the values that a human, like what you value a human life and kind of the rules of order. And so we've there's quite a lot of literature on this, but it's basically thinking about risk in terms of everything from near-term like bias, and then thinking about misuse, and then the longer-term risks of staying aligned with humans being in control, humans with based in democratic values of what we build our social systems around.
Okay. And Dave, since you've seen all technological revolutions, mobile, cloud, and now to AI, do you consider AI as a wild, wild west right now?
Oh, I don't think it's the Wild West at all. I wouldn't characterize it like that. I think I would say that there are a lot of organizations that are actually, well, first of all, AI has been around for a long time. I mean, unfortunately, I'm old enough, if I would grow all this in, it'd be gray, to have done a lot of work in some very ancient programming languages. And so artificial intelligence has been around a while. What's changed is the speed, the basic unit of compute has gotten smaller, the technologies have gotten better, and the cost to do it has gotten. And so organizations are seeing this, and they're taking advantage of it pretty quickly. Like, we were talking about just the speed is not preordained, so to speak. And so some organizations realize that, and they're making breakthroughs in healthcare. And they're making breakthroughs in education. As you can imagine, students, young people are like the first to jump all over this. Young people might be a little bit of the Wild West themselves, but they're doing these things. So I don't think it's the Wild West. I think this is a fantastic phase of experimentation, a fantastic phase of discovery and learning and growing of skill sets. I think we're just we're at the very beginning.
Sean, for you, one member of the audience wants to know, if you spend on safety and guardrails, are you doomed to lag competitors that don't spend on safety and guardrails?
I actually see it the other way. I think there's an incredible opportunity for innovation around guardrails and transparency, because at the end of the day, whether it's the American consumer or the Chinese consumer, they will want to know how the machine came to the answers that it came to. They will want to know that what they're trusting is actually reliable. So I think there's an incredible amount of innovation around having machines explain what the sources are, how they modeled itself to answer these questions, what the assumptions that were made, so that there's greater transparency. And that takes a lot of engineering to do that. Right now, it's a black box, even to engineers, as to how these billions of coefficients work together. I think there's incredible innovation around that. So for me, I don't see regulation or ethics as a bottleneck. I think as I mentioned, it's that we just have chaotic implementation of legal rules right now in different courts and lack of uniform regulation in the United States. That's the impediment. But I think when it comes to ethics and transparency, I see that as huge competitive advantages for us in the future, because
And
those will become competitive differentiators for all the great companies that we have on the stage today.
okay, for Dimitri, can you share Perplexity's roadmap, product roadmap? What's in the pipeline and how do you differentiate from competitors?
Yeah, well, you have to come work at Perplexity to see the full roadmap. So we're growing. One of the things I'm most excited about that we're going to release in the coming months is a Perplexity web browser called Comet. This is, kind of like when Perplexity first launched.
Oh, and on comment, by the way, another audience member wants to know, will it enable users to do things with it different from Chrome and Safari?
Yeah, exactly.
David D.
Yeah.
wants to know.
Yeah. So when Perplexity first launched, everyone said you're crazy to take on Google. Nobody's been able to do that ever. And it's because AI now enables going from links to answers that it was possible to compete in that space and actually create a different level of user experience that unlocks a behavior change. And I think the same thing is possible in the browser. The way I think about the browser is we're now able to use all of the websites you're logged into, your email, your calendar, your Slack, your Notion, as additional sources to answer your questions. So I use Comet every day, and the first thing I start with is I say, prep me for my day today. And what it does is it looks at my calendar, which is just a tab that opens invisibly in the browser. It sees who I'm meeting with. It cross-indexes that with my email and then pulls in the context and then runs searches on all those people, all those companies, and gives me that synthesis. And that literally would be 6-8 hours of work for an EA, and I get that instantly to start my morning. So and that's very different than where Chrome and Safari are now. I'm sure, as it was in the answer engine space, others will.
They
compete.
actually said that AI and agents would replace Google search, but if you look at Google's earnings recently, which were blowout, it has had no impact actually on Google's revenue growth. So is that overstated then? That AI and Lila, if you want to jump into this question as well,
No.
we're just going to stay away from that. But yeah, there has been no proof so far that AI has hurt Google search.
I think there's one is some of these trends play out over longer time windows. I think the second is we're growing the pie of the internet, right? I think one of the ways to think about what's happening is we're just making the internet more useful, and there's still people being onboarded to the internet, right? So this is still a growing train. We're increasing the size of the pie. There of course will be some reallocation of kind of usage, but that will take time.
And for Lila, how do you balance compute costs and quality in serving AI responses at scale?
Yeah, we've been doing, and this kind of gets back to the point about pace. I think the pace is important to stay ahead, but so is innovation. I think there is still a lot in the basic models that needs innovation. How do we, the examples that Dimitri just shared, like agents can serve you better if they can do better planning and what does memory mean and concepts. Like there's a lot still that we believe that it's not just a data scaling, that there's still work that needs to be done at the model level. So part of that innovation is also how do you get the same capabilities in a smaller model so that it consumes less, that you can serve it to a wider audience more efficiently. So I think that's one of them. The other thing is how do we also optimize existing energy infrastructure? We've done a lot of work on Google data centers, actually just using AI. We've optimized, we saved about 40% of the costs around the data centers, existing data centers, just with the use of AI. So I think so I think there's still a lot of work that we can do in the current in the current generation while we continue to innovate. But clearly, this is an area of sustainability that we're all thinking about, is like, what is the impact? Where is this technology going? How do we make sure we have the right compute infrastructure? Fortunately, I think, again, this is mentioned in the first part of this session, there's a lot of work that where the US has been building out and will continue to build out.
And what about the compute spend? Because I think Google recently mentioned that they're sticking to their 70 to 80 billion dollar spend this year for capex. You know, Amazon's going up to 100 billion. Yeah. Meta says they're going up to 65, et cetera, et cetera. I think Microsoft's still at 85 billion. Is that? Do you foresee that sort of growth for the next few years?
Yeah, and actually that happens outside of my responsibility. So I can't really. Maybe in my semiconductor days, I would have had a stronger point of view, but.
Yeah, it's just the amount of money that's being poured into AI, and that hasn't abated just yet, Dave. So what is the finish line? An audience member wants to know, what is the finish line for AGI?
What is the finish line for AGI?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Dimitri said, like, I don't think this is an or, it's an and. And so, you know, I think what we have happening here is, you know, with these technologies, the application space, I think, is going to become incredibly important, because you're going to be able to take ideas and quickly put those ideas into action and into something. And you don't necessarily need to have a high technical acumen. So you don't need to learn, you don't necessarily need to learn a programming language. And so, where's the finish line? I mean, that's really hard to say, because I think we're activating an entire new part of capabilities that we're going to bring to this world. People are going to, and it's just not going to really matter where you live or you know, what your paradigm is. If you can convert these ideas into something that's actionable, that you can deliver, and you can do it fast. And to your point about compute, increasingly you'll be able to do it at a pretty efficiently in cost. That cost will continue to come down. So I don't know where the finish line is, and I think that's an exciting part of where we are.
And just wondering, Sean, who decides what is good versus bad? How do you get global consensus in a diverse world?
You know, I think that's a really tough question right now. What's going to happen is that we're going to have 8 to 10 jurors in different courtrooms around the country answering that question, right? In terms of what's fair use, whether this company's product caused harm, and who should be held liable for that harm. So I don't think it's a question of how do we decide these things. I think it comes back to process of, is it the right solution for us that we have these different courthouses around the country in the United States with different jurors, different judges, different facts, making these monumental decisions that will have not only impact on the companies that are subject to those lawsuits, but the industry at large? Or is there an ability for the countries to come together? And we saw that with the Patent Harmonization Act. We saw it with privacy regulation in a lot of different areas. So for me, it's really about, there's a greater need for, yes, competition. We're going to compete against China and other countries, but there's also a need for cooperation, where the United States can take a leadership role and actually engage and come up with more cooperative frameworks for regulation. And so to me, it's not really who, but it's the process of how we get there.
Okay, Dimitri, last question to you, and then we'll get final thoughts from the panels quickly in these last 5 minutes. Dimitri, how far away are we from AGI?
I actually don't believe in AGI. I don't. It's not. Nobody's actually come up with a workable definition of what it even is. What I believe in is that human curiosity is boundless, and that's the thing that will keep pushing us forward. We always need people to come up with the next set of problems, the next set of challenges. You know, we create our own world. We're not going to be interested in a world that a computer creates for itself. So yeah, I think for me, this is all about enhancing our reach, our productivity, not about, you know, the wishful thinking that some overlord will come in and solve all our problems for us.
Okay, maybe that's what we're hoping AI to do.
Yeah.
But just final thoughts here from our entire panel. And thank you so much for sharing the time with us. But in terms of revolution, regulation, repercussions, what keeps you up at night right now, Lila?
I think there is a balance of both the risks, and as AI gets more general and more capable, how are we, and being in this field, it's like, how are we spending every single moment of every single day to ensure that we're mitigating risks? The other thing that keeps me up at night is how do we make sure we're doing that while also really maximizing the opportunity? We're already seeing how AI is like the modern day telescope or microscope, giving us a view of the world in a very different way, helping us understand diseases, to develop therapeutics, to deal with the energy issues, deal with pollution and so much more. But I fear sometimes that we're so focused on the risk, we're not spending the amount of focus and time really to maximize the opportunity for humanity and doing it with society and with businesses so AI doesn't happen to them, but rather with them. So that tension keeps me up a lot.
Okay, great answer. Day to day for you, Dave, how do you think about AI?
Well, I think I'm ever the optimist. I mean, I'm very fortunate in the role that I'm in. I get to see a lot of the things that public sector institutions and just customers are doing globally, and it's accelerating drug discovery. It's helping students do creative writing, this new world that we're in. And so there are just so many opportunities, and I think what keeps me up at night is what Michael mentioned on his panel about adoption and speed, because I think if we're going to get through these things that we're wrestling with right now, we do have to move with pace. That's the only way we're going to get to the place where we want to be and into the next stage is adoption.
Sean, what do you see ahead?
For me, I see a lot of really important issues being decided in the next 1 to 2, 3 years in the courtroom. So I'm really focused on how do I do the best job I can to explain accurately and clearly the technology so that the jurors and judges actually have the real facts about what AI is today and what it is not. But I love the optimism in this room because that's the other piece of the fair use analysis that the courts will have to struggle with, which is how do we benefit from this technology in ways that are fundamental and transformative that you cannot gain through conventional computing technology. So for me, that's what I'm focused on is how do I explain the technology more clearly and how do I leverage all this great optimism and advanced thinking about the way AI can be used in the future so that everyday people will want to buy in. And if they want it, then they'll make the right decisions ultimately on fair use. But I do worry about that we're not going to be successful in the end in translating these complicated ideas or having enough of this public benefit in front of the decision makers, and that's what I'm focused on.
Dimitri?
Yeah, just building off their comments, the average American adult has to make 35,000 decisions every single day. Now, a lot of these are trivially small, but some are very significant. And I think we're at the very, only a small percentage of those today are aided by AI technologies. And we just need to think about how we increase that percentage and let people focus on the choices that actually matter to them, that are morally important to them, and get to live more intentional lives. And so I'm just very excited about this future, and we're at the very beginning stages of it.
I like the optimism to end this session, and thank you so much again to our wonderful panelists for sharing their time and their insights, and thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you.